All right. Hey, everybody. I know it's been a while since I've done any videos or podcasts. I want to try to get back into that mode. So, this is the first talk that I'm hopefully going to be doing again, weekly talks into. This week, what I wanted to get into is something that I've seen as a trend more and more when I'm talking with students on campus. I'm realizing that not only do I need to convince them that Christianity is true, I actually have to go about convincing them that they should want Christianity to be true. So where in the past I would say our goals as apologists or as Christians is really to convince somebody that truth exists, that God exists, that Scripture is the Word of God, and that Jesus is God. I'm realizing that I also need to convince people that they should want Christianity to be true. Ultimately, there's so many people that are just, I really don't care. Christianity can be true. That's true for you. That's great. And that goes a little bit with the truth thing. But even some people are coming to me and saying, even if it turns out that there is only one true thing and Christianity is that, I just don't care. And so that's what I want to get into today. So a lot of the things I'm going to be sharing in this is from a book called Person of Interest by J. Warner Wallace. This is a new book that just came out this last month. And he talks a lot about these different things and really kind of showing that if God really just appeared in history, what we should expect is that he appears in such a way that history seems to be molded and shaped by this person. If you throw a rock into the water that's all still, there's these ripples that come out from it. And we should expect that the impact that God, if he becomes incarnate as a man, should have similar ripples and effects onto history and to everything else. And that's what we find. So a lot of the things that I'm sharing with you come from that book. I highly recommend checking it out. It's a really great read, especially if you're not somebody who's really in depth into really academic stuff. He writes in a way that's exciting. He's an ex-cold case detective. He's applying what he knows from that in order to examine the Christian worldview. So with this is a talk that I've kind of actually put together from my teaching at Ratio Christi. And this, like I said, is one of those points that I'm realizing is something that I need to be teaching my students along the way, where in the past I've just looked at it and said, you need to know truth exists, God exists, Scripture is the Word of God, and Jesus is God, then you're set. Now, more and more, I'm realizing when I'm talking with people, you need to convince them that they should want Christianity to be true. And so what we're doing in this, I want to be clear in what I'm doing is not necessarily saying that the Christian faith is in fact true. I'm not even saying that it's possible that it can be proven to be true or reasonable even to be true. Now, that is things that I do believe. I wouldn't go as far to say we can prove that Christianity is true or prove that Jesus is actually God, but I think we can get to a point that it is the most reasonable conclusion. But today, what we're getting into is not that. Today, what we're getting into is we're making the point that of all the worldviews that exist, all of the worldviews that are possible, that could exist in some way or another, and this is generally looking at the worldviews that people accept, because yes, we could make up another worldview that maybe is a little bit more exciting and everything's peaches and rainbows at all times and all places. But of the worldviews that people generally follow and believe in, what we are arguing in this is that the Christian worldview is the one that people should want to be true. So the first point I think we can make in this is that showing that Christianity, and this is not something that's wholly unique to Christianity. I think Islam and Judaism and maybe even a handful of other religions would also have this view, is Christianity gives you a much more eternal perspective. And this becomes significant and important because in the end, what this shows you is it's kind of like if we're looking at a television screen, and now we have 4K televisions. I remember when it was 1080p televisions, but you think of just like the one dot on that television screen, and that one dot isn't really significant. It's really not that important. It doesn't have much impact. But, if that goes out, there might be a way that you kind of notice that, as we kind of see on this demonstration here of looking at a television screen, and you're zoomed in on one little pixel that went out, and it's going to mess up your screen at points. But from a Christian perspective, what we're looking at is, well, your life is kind of like that one little pixel on the screen. It wouldn't be all that impressive. It wouldn't be all that significant. But when we bring in the possibility of an eternity, now it's that one pixel affects the entire rest of the screen. The way that you live this life, or what you believe in this life now, is actually going to affect your eternity, in essence, the rest of the pixels on that television screen. And so therefore, your life has meaning and your life has purpose in a much greater way than atheism can ever promote. And so theism provides a purpose for life that makes it wholly unique and more desirable than an atheistic perspective. So that's point number one. Furthermore, with this, if our life, all it is, and there is no eternity, is just this life here, there's a level at which we would have to just look at it and say, man, this is a pretty pitiful existence. Richard Dawkins, who's a very devout atheist, who really promotes against Christianity, he's considered part of that new atheist movement. He's even been called the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse and different things like that. And this is what he has to say from his perspective, which is rather bleak, and I think points out to us the reasons why, given the worldviews that are possible, atheism is not the one that I want to be true. He says the total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive. Many others are running for their lives and whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within and rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe is precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. And that's what you're faced with. If atheism is true, out of all the possibilities, that's what you're faced with. And I think Dawkins is spot on to be making these sort of claims with that. And so if I'm evaluating which worldview do I want to be true, maybe not one is actually true, I'm throwing atheism out. Because, and a point that he doesn't hit on very much there, is justice especially is something that will never be served from an atheist perspective. There's no even possibility for it. In the end, bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, and there is no claim or belief or reason to think that will ever be brought to justice if atheism is true. So that allows us to know, all right, given the possibilities, I wouldn't want atheism to be true. The next thing ends up getting into, of course, evaluating other worldviews. So when we're looking at religions now, all other religions claim to be truth and claim to fix the problem of the world, but only Christianity claims that the problem is solved by God coming to us, not us working our way to God. And so this is a wholly and unique claim to the Christian worldview. It's totally one that is not necessarily accepted by other religions. Every religion in some way is looking at it and saying that there's a gap. There's a problem. There's a gap between you and God. There's a gap between you and nirvana. There's a gap between you understanding that you are God, between you reaching whatever it may be that this religion is claiming. Every religion in some way is saying that the world is not as it should be. What's wholly unique in Christianity is looking at it and saying the way that that is fixed is not by what you and I do, but it's fixed by what God does for us. So where this gap is usually this gap between you and God, let's say, Christianity is looking at it and saying, yes, it's a gap between you and God that is made up by God coming to us. Where every religion is actually going to say, other than Christianity, that gap is made up by you performing good works, by you earning your way back in some form or another. So Islam, for instance, is going to say to know your knowledge of yourself and God has been blurred. So the problem with the world is that ultimately you are good, but you have failed to realize that. That image has been blurred by the fall. Your realization of your goodness and your being created in God's image has been fudged in some way because of the fall. And the way to fix that is you work your way back to God. Similarly, when we look at another religion, we could look at Hinduism. Your understanding and connection with the Brahma, God, has been lost by your bad karma. And through reincarnation and living the good life can be restored. So you forgetting that you are actually God or you're united with the Brahma, or you will achieve nirvana, depending on which version of Hinduism you're really looking at, is achieved again by you working your way there. Even Scientology is going to say you've been damaged by your reactive mind, these past experiences that you've had in past lives, bad things that happened to you as a child that now has damaged your conscious, your subconscious in such a way that you just don't act good. And the way then to fix that is to go through these audits that Scientologists provide in order for you to put your reactive mind on the back seat so you can live the life as the Thetan spirit that you are. So Baha'i also does this. It's saying that you're moving towards knowledge and good action will bring the world to a better place and unity with each other. That the world isn't as it should be. It should be more united. We should be able to see that really all of these religions are really teaching the same thing, that they're actually just God revealing himself further through each different religion. And the way that we'll come to know and understand how that's gone awry is loving each other, is working towards good knowledge, good action. And that's how it's going to be fixed. It's again on you to fix it. But Christianity in the end is going to look at it and say, no, this is actually fixed because of what Christ did on the cross. Now, does that mean you and I as Christians are looking at it and saying, I can live however I want? No. Real Christian faith is inseparable really from good works. If I have true faith, I will do good works, but those good works are not what earned my salvation. Those good works will continue on through my true faith. So true faith cannot not have those good works. And true faith allows us, by faith and the grace given to us by God, we're able to perform those good works. But those good works are not what's fixing the gap. Those good works have only been a proof of our true faith and what Christ has done for us. So another way of putting it is the Christian view of salvation is belief equals salvation and good works. Now, this is a little formulaic, and I think there's ways that we need to hash that out a little bit more. But for the purpose of this, what we're pointing out is ways that Christianity is wholly unique and how the cults end up getting this wrong. LDS, also known as Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, they're going to look at it and ultimately say, you have to perform good works in order to be saved, which is something that Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestants are all going to say, no, your good works aren't what save you, but continuing on those good works is somewhat of a requirement, which is different. So the good works are a continuation of your faith and sanctification of you in that. But your good works, what you have done, is not in the end what has saved you. And so in that sense, again, this is totally different. Christianity is looking at it totally different and saying, you can't earn your way back. you cannot fix the gap between you and God. Every other religion is saying you have to fix it. And that's what separates us. And that's part of why, as we evaluate these world religions, this should be what anybody would want to be true. All right, so let's start getting into some of the reasons, especially that Wallace points out in his book. The first is science. And I know a lot of you are thinking, science, what do you mean? How is science going to convince me that Christianity should be true, or I should want Christianity to be true? Isn't Christianity against science? Well, no, I wouldn't say that Christianity is against science. In fact, I think people that ultimately look at it and say Christianity is against science are misunderstanding what is understood by faith. They look at it and they say, well, isn't Christianity faith, which is belief in spite of an evidence? And that is not the way theologians have ever defined it. It's never been the way that we've understood it. There's never going to be a theologian that is well respected that you will find that defines faith this way. It's a very odd thing that a lot of times scientists who don't believe in God want to then define a term that is a theological term for us. It's kind of odd because it's straw manning it. It would be like if I, as a Christian who doesn't believe in evolution, would end up saying, evolution is the belief that we evolved from monkeys, and insisting that we use that definition. And therefore, all scientists are crazy to believe in evolution. You would understand that if I was doing that, I would just not be looking at this appropriately. I'm redefining what something is meant and then throwing it out. That's the definition of a straw man logical fallacy. So in the same way, when an atheist says, well, faith is belief in spite of evidence, that is exactly what they're doing. So faith is only antithetical science if we let scientists decide how to define what faith is. And they're straw manning it. Faith is trusting in that which you have reason to believe is true. Once you have come to believe that something is true using reliable epistemological means, you can then place your faith and trust in those things. And that's what we mean as Christians when we say we have faith. What we're looking at is we're saying, all right, I've seen reasons why I should believe in God and I should believe in the scriptures, and then I'm using those to believe in other things. So no, Christianity is not throwing out science. In fact, I would use science to prove Christianity in some other videos. But that's not what's going on here. So what do we mean that science should be a reason why someone should want Christianity to be true? Well, because science has really been something that has been backed up by Christianity more than any other worldview. Some of the largest jumps in science have been in coincidence with the significant Christian history. So the Edict of Milan was huge in allowing scientific discovery to happen. Monasteries and Catholic schools were huge in making a lot of the progress to science, and those were obviously things created by Christians to promote those sort of things. Muslims in the Middle Ages. We do have this time period during the Middle Ages that it seems science is more backed up by the Christian faith or by the Muslim faith, but it's a very short period of time. We haven't really seen a continuation of Muslims really pushing for science and scientific discovery in the same way that Christians have since the Middle Ages. And so though it's this short time, and a lot of Muslims like to look at that and say, look at all the ways that we helped science and we helped math progress during the Middle Ages, there's a bit that I have to look at that and say, hey, yes, I can give you that, the Middle Ages, but if we're evaluating all together all of the time of history of which worldview is most helping science progress and move forward, I gotta take Christianity, because Christianity has continually, except for that short time in the Middle Ages, encouraged scientific discovery. You see the universities, again, institutions that were put out by Christians, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, started by Christians, oftentimes in order to help missionaries know how to do science well for wherever they go to do their mission, so they can help the people more there. The printing press, that was hugely pushed, again, by Christians, made by Christians. The Reformation also helps with the Age of Enlightenment in huge ways. All of these things are reasons why we see Christians helped promote science more than any other worldview. Great scientists of the world, Gregory Mendel, Isaac Newton, Francis Collins, Blaise Pascal, Samuel Morse, all of these people. And in the book, J. Warner Wallace, in Person of Interest, also points out all of these different people that when you look at the fathers of modern sciences, modern areas of science, almost all of them are Christians. And he gives a whole list of all of these different people. So that's why I don't want to share everything that's in the book. You should get the book yourself. But those are some of the things that are super helpful. Kepler, this is what he says. I was merely thinking God's thoughts after him, since we astronomers are priests of the highest God in regard to the book of nature. It benefits us to be thoughtful. 2, for the glory of our minds, but rather above all else to the glory of God. So here, Kepler is pointing out the reason that he thinks he should be doing science is because it is helping us understand things about God and his nature. So we have these natural revelations, things that can be discovered by science, and we have these supernatural revelations, things that we get through scriptures and other things like that. So studying science is actually seen as a Christian thing. I mentioned already before when we look at just the impact on education. Teaching is a high emphasis of the Christian faith. You see in Deuteronomy 6:6, it says, teach your children. It says, teaching them the commandments in Matthew 28:18. And Jesus is often called a teacher. So the idea of teaching is really important. Language is important. Language is something that hugely is pushed by Christians and has been something that Christians have brought along and helped with in many ways more than any, again, other worldview, especially when you look at missions. So missions in particular, we see that missionaries were often the people that helped produce alphabets for countries that did not have one, or produced languages for countries that did not have one, because they wanted them to be able to then have their own language that then they could translate the Bible into to give that to them. So this education was part of the missionary process. The Bible itself has been translated into 3,414 languages, making huge advancements to literacy in that process. Again, with education, let me just back up here. You see that the universities were a Christian invention. The Benedict of Nursia encouraged gathering of texts and inventing of libraries. The 15 best universities in the world were founded by Christians, some even founded upon the Christian vision or mission. Ethics is also something that Christianity has had a huge impact over. The idea of taking care of the poor and the needy is something that Christianity hugely promotes. In fact, James 1:27 says, true religion is to look after the orphans and widows in their affliction. So religion, according to Christianity, a huge part of it, if you're not doing it right, it's because you're not taking care of the people around you. And we see this through the Christian history that Christians have applied this. The reason that churches today have a tax-free status is ultimately the government's looking at it and saying, we could create these governmental programs to try to help people who are in need, but we realize that having local organizations that help do those things is actually going to be more effective because the government's not able to know the specific needs to the area as well as local congregations or organizations that are nonprofit and maybe aren't churches. But churches originally getting that nonprofit status, the reason is because those are the organizations taking care of the poor and needy around. And so it made sense the government giving it tax-free status, because in the end it actually meant the government had to financially invest less money itself into trying to create those programs. It was more effective in helping the poor and the needy. And so it was less money for the government to allow these organizations to have a tax-free status. So that's why churches have that tax-free status, is because they help that. When you look, probably if you look up the homeless organizations in your area that are helping the homeless, soup kitchens or places for homeless to stay, I'm willing to put money down on it that the majority of those are not government organizations or secular organizations. The majority of those are going to be Christian organizations helping the poor and the needy in your area. Shelters for the homeless are oftentimes, and if not mainly or totally, Christian organizations. Christians are also the main force behind the abolition of the slave trade. Christians were the main force, driving force behind the civil rights movement, as well as the rights of women within different countries as well. And we see that especially now, comparing it to Islam with Afghanistan, and we're seeing the rights of women that were established because our government had intervened were taken away as the establishment of an Islamic state came in. And so those sort of things show us once again, Christianity is the religion. If you want a religion to be true, is the one that you want to be true. So we can also see this impact on ethics when we look out and zoom out into humanitarian aid. And so when we look at this, what we ultimately see is modern hospitals were invented by Christians. Modern orphanage was invented by Christians. Homeless shelters are often the majority of a Christian program, as I mentioned earlier. Groups like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous are Christian of origin, and we all know how many people have been helped to get out of these addictions through those processes. Reformation of the prison system is something that Chuck Colson with Prison Fellowship and realizing that we have made systems that oftentimes are actually making it so people are dependent upon the system. And that's not good. In the end, that's actually hurting people because now they go into the system of a prison and they don't leave that with the tools and the equipment to get out of the lifestyle they were living in that brought them to prison. But in the end, they just repeat back into it. And so something like Prison Fellowship is coming along and saying we need to change that. And they're not just doing that here in the United States. They're doing that elsewhere. An interesting thing to note as well is a lot of people will look at it and say, well, this is just the golden rule. This is something that every religion would say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But that's not really true. People will talk about Buddha put out the silver rule, which is do not do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you, and say, see, Jesus wasn't putting out anything new. He was just repeating what Buddha had already said. Well, that has actually a completely different application when you think about it. If the way I need to live my life is just not doing harm to others, when I see someone that's in need, I don't have any obligation to help them because it's not my fault that they were in that situation. My job is just to make sure I'm not harming others. I have no duty to help others, which is what makes, again, Christianity wholly different than anything else. And so that's just an important point I think people miss a lot of times. And it's an important thing to point out because even the ways that people want to look at it and say religions are basically saying the same thing is just factually untrue when you start to look at those things. So art and music is another thing that is a little different than most people think of, but art and music actually ends up being another reason that I think if you wanted any worldview to be true, this would be the one. Christianity teaches that art is a way of glorifying and honoring God through the gifts God has given you. Thus, art is encouraged and is seen as a form of worship because you're using these gifts, you're using these talents that God has given you to glorify Him with. And that's why we see such great art oftentimes being surrounded by a Christian community. The masters in every art genre of history were inspired by Jesus. Now, this is something, again, you'll have to get the book that J. Warner Wallace kind of goes and points out. Art was hugely funded by the church for a large portion of history. Today, some of the greatest artist treasures were either funded by the church or inspired by the teachings of Christianity itself. And we can see this with all sorts of different types of art. Other religions just don't inspire the same artistic diversity. When you go and you look at Buddha sculptures, for instance, you go and you see a Buddha sculpture in Indonesia and you see one in India, or you see one even here in the United States. They're all almost exactly the same. But with Christianity, the things that have inspired artists, You can have all sorts of different depictions of these things. Music as well, memorization and notation, going from memorizing it to notating it is something that was a Christian invention. Monophony versus harmonization of music, Christian invention. Modal systems, major and minor scales, that's a Christian invention. So music is hugely impacted by Christian. Nearly every famous artist you may think of has written a song inspired by or referencing Jesus. So you can see that Jesus has this impact that is significantly greater than anybody else. And that should be noted. Again, if Jesus really is God coming to earth, that's what we should expect. We should expect that people can't stop talking about him, that there's something about him that just grips us that we can't shake off. And so when we look at art, we see things like these pieces of art that are hugely inspired by the stories within the Gospels. You can see these are 3 different illustrations of the crucifixion by some of the greatest artists. We see Adam and Eve here. We have The Sower by Van Gogh. Going further, we have more crucifixions being illustrated. These are some of the greatest artists in specific genres of art, and they're doing art to depict Bible stories, especially Jesus, because he's that impactful. And so that again just increases this idea that, all right, our art, if you like art, the worldview that is most going to embrace that is the Christian worldview. Jesus is the primary interest of all of literature. 17,239 books in the Library of Congress have to do with Christianity, have to do with the Christian worldview, are really Bible-related things. Second comes Shakespeare with 9,000. When we look at other things that are referenced, when you go to Google Books and you see which person is most talked about within all of literature, Google Books, you're going to see that you're going to have 109 million things that talk about Jesus. 109 million books on Google Books that talk about Jesus. George Washington is the second with 58 million. Now, that probably tells you a little bit of a Western focus, but it still shows you how much of an importance it has. Best-selling books, about 5 billion copies of the Bible are circulated. Only 800 million of the Quran. Of non-religious texts hold. When we're looking at non-Christian, essentially books that are not just the Bible or commentaries on the Bible, we see that The Lord of the Rings is the 4th most popular book of all of history, which again is a Catholic guy. This is Tolkien right here who's writing that. And C.S. Lewis with his Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is number 9 with 85 million sold. He's right here. They love, Christianity loves and embraces literature. So a lot of people like to promote the idea that they're claiming that Christianity is just copied from other religions. And that's just not true. When you actually examine the data, what you actually find is the other religions are actually copying Christianity. And we also see that the other religions, interestingly enough, they all seem to want to have Jesus on their side. Muslims want to call Jesus a prophet. Baha'i claims him as one of the prophets. LDS claim him as part of the Godhead, and he's not fully God. They embrace him as Savior and everything else, and then they add a bunch of things to it. The Jews, though rarely, may even call Jesus a rabbi and seem at the very least to be proud of the fact that he's Jewish. Hindus even add him to their Godhead. So we have all of these different religions that in the end, they're looking at it and saying, this Jesus guy is important enough that we want to add him to what we have going on. And we want him to be central to our faith, or at least impactful to our faith. That's what we should expect. If Jesus really is God, that's exactly what we should expect. Now, some people will throw out some objections here. They'll want to look at it and say, well, if Christianity really is true, why do you have all of these black eyes? The Crusades, you have racism of KKK, slavery, degrading of women. It's antithetical to science. It's not caring for the environment. So we've talked about how it's just not true, that it's antithetical to science. And with that comes the fact that Christians should really care about the environment and do really care about the environment. So those two things don't really add up. The degrading of women also doesn't really make sense when we look at that. But a point that I do want to make here is in these examples with the KKK, with the Crusades, with some of the times that Christians have been horrible in ethics, in the ways that they've lived their lives, the people that are doing that are not following the most basic teachings of the Christian worldview. And so when we're evaluating a worldview, worldviews should be judged by those who are actually following that worldview, not those who are failing to follow it. The black eyes of the Christian faith are the result of those who fail to follow the teaching example of the founder of the faith. This is wholly different than other religions, where other religions, Islam, ultimately the people that live in some ways doing some horrible things are following the example that Muhammad set. Where I cannot say, when Jesus says, love your neighbors as yourself, love your enemies, pray for your enemies, those who are part of the KKK, those who are doing racist things, are following what Jesus said. They're not. They're not an example of what Christianity is. So in the end, what are the reasons that we should want Christianity to be true? There's a few. First, it provides the highest reward of any worldview, because it's ultimately saying it's an eternal reward, which makes it way bigger than anything atheism has to offer. And it's something that is given once and for all for you. And that reward is given not because of what you do, but because of what Christ did. It has the least amount of requirements for said reward. It's also advanced science more than any other worldview, and it provides a foundation for it. Something that I didn't mention previously is when you look at the atheist worldview, you have problems because ultimately, I don't know if I can trust my reasoning if in the end, the only thing my reasoning is based upon is chemical changes within my body and reactions to my environment. I don't know if that's really trustworthy. So atheism doesn't provide that foundation, and any polytheistic worldview wouldn't provide that foundation either, because the gods could be at war and change the laws of physics and anything like that at a moment's notice. So in the end, it provides a foundation for science better than any other worldview. It's advanced education more than any worldview and advocates for its advancements. It's done more for the advancement of ethics and in turn humanitarian aid than any other worldview, and is based upon its view that humankind is created in God's image. It has impacted and contributed to the creativity and art more than any other worldview because art can be an act of worship. And lastly, it has contributed to the impact of literature more than any other worldview, meaning it desires for the growth and advancement of literature. So again, all that we've proven in this, and the point of this video was not to say that Christianity is true, but given the possibilities and worldviews that are presented in front of us, Christianity is the one you should want to be true. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe and tell some other people about it. If this has been helpful for you, please also think about supporting this financially, and that will allow me to produce more content. There's a link below. Thanks a lot.